This is Virginia Trioli on ABC Radio Melbourne.
Good morning. Today, a powerful and incredibly important story about surviving family violence when the perpetrator is a serving member of the Victorian Police Force. It's a shocking tale of abuse and of police failing to hold their own members to account. Please stay and listen to Michelle. She'll be talking to you straight after the news headlines with Melissa Brown. Michelle and Liam are not their real names, but this is their true story. They lived with a Victoria police officer who was verbally, emotionally and physically abusive to the point where Michelle feared for their lives, only to have her escape plan revealed to him by fellow police officers and for the system to comprehensively fail them when she sought justice. Does Victoria Police have a problem confronting the truth when it comes to violence committed by their own? This is their story. The police will join you after 9 o'clock to respond. And a warning, we speak about issues of abuse and violence, so please call 1-800-RESPECT if you need support. I spoke to both Michelle and Liam earlier, and I started by asking how Michelle first met John.
He was a friend of a friend, so in the country, and I'm originally a country girl, so just met him that way and sort of hit it off. So, and everything was normal to begin with.
How long were things okay before they started to go wrong?
I think the first year was lovely, but if I look back now, I can see the red flags. He seemed very romantic, very caring, almost paternal, like making sure I was okay all the time. I now realise that was about control, but at the time I thought he was a great guy and a fantastic partner.
When did it start to go wrong?
When did I realise it was going wrong? Or in hindsight, when do I realise it went wrong?
That's an interesting distinction. What does that mean for you, that difference?
I realised something had gone badly wrong when he punched me in the face the first time. And there'd been intimidation, shoving, coercive control behaviours going on for years, and I hadn't picked that up. I can now see that, but at the time it was the first time I got hit, because you don't think that all of those other behaviours are family violence.
You'd somehow normalised or explained away or justified that other behaviour?
Justifying. So he would, he's a police officer, he has a very stressful job, he's seen a lot of horrendous car accidents, he spent most of his career in highway patrol, and he would trigger and he would come home and he clearly had PTSD, and I used to talk to him about it and he was saying, no, there's nothing wrong with me in the head, I'm not weak in the head, but he clearly had it. He would come home, he would drink, and then he would act up and he'd be really aggressive and nasty. And I would just like, it's the job and it's VicPol not supporting him properly, and they'd know they don't manage mental health properly. It was not his fault. And I felt responsible for managing his emotions. So I even changed jobs. I stepped back in my career about 10 years to take an easier job so that I could be more supportive of him and try and lower the aggression levels. And he didn't want me to work in the job I was in anyway. So I was making excuses for him all the time.
That first physical attack, what changed inside you and your thinking at that time?
I was just shocked. It was like, did that just happen? But I had quite bad facial bruising afterwards, because it wasn't just getting hit in the face once. He was bossing me around and wanting me to change jobs again, and I didn't want to. So I walked away from the conversation because I could see it was escalating, and he took that as me being disrespectful and went after me. Hit me in the face once, and then outside I got dragged down the driveway, head pummeled into the letterbox, stone letterbox, and then the assault continued. And after that, I think I had a concussion, because I woke up the next morning, I was still wearing my work lanyard, and obviously you don't sleep in your work lanyard, your shoes and your clothes in the kids' playroom. So
you'd been taken in there? And
I think I'd stumbled in there. My recollection after the assault is really fuzzy. I don't remember him leaving the house. I know because as part of COVID-19 and cleaning up our houses like we all did when we were in isolation because you've got nothing better to do, I found my work diary and I know he was on night shift that week. So he must have, after he assaulted me, gone to work. But I don't remember that.
How long did it go on for, the assaults?
From the first time I was hit, it was probably 18 months, I'd say, but he'd threatened to hit me. He'd sort of intimidated before then, and I don't know when that first time was. And I guess you don't take it seriously until they actually hit you, and then it's like, did he just do that? But after that assault, and this is something I think that's important to stress just so you understand the mind of a domestic violence victim, I wrote him an apology note saying, I'm so sorry for setting you off and making you hit me.
And you would immediately take on that. That was your fault. That was something you'd done.
Yeah.
Gee, it's a common and well-known syndrome, isn't it? You're describing it just exactly as we know it.
And I still felt responsible even when I left him, when, I escalated to police pretty strongly. I felt guilty. I felt torn that I was having to choose between him and my kids. But that's a really obvious choice. You have to pick your kids. But I have all these text messages on my phone where he's calling me a Judas, accusing me of, betraying him, and how could I do this to him?
We'll get to that and what you decided to do in just a moment. Lifeline, of course, is on 13 11 14, or the National Sexual Assault Domestic Family Violence Counselling Service is 1-800-RESPECT. There's services that are available if you feel like you need to reach out for help. Liam, what were you seeing?
Well, I remember I was in bed and I could not sleep at all. I saw them going outside and I went to the front window and I just see him, he grabbed Mum by her, scruff of her neck, I think, and, pulled her down, and her head, smashed into the letterbox. And then she kind of, went into her ball to cover her head, and he's just on top of her, sending punches down. And I'm just frozen there, just staring at that, going, and what is this? And I was very conflicted at the time because we had a safety plan. It was that in case something was happening, I had to get my sister and just leave as fast as I could and protect myself and my sister and don't worry about Mum. And when I saw that happening, I was really conflicted because I see this horrible stuff happening and I want to go out there and stop it, but I know I can't because I don't want to make it worse, and because of the safety plan as well. And then eventually, after he had stopped throwing punches, he got up and got in his car and drove off. And Mum was just laying there for a bit and then got up and stumbled to the front door, and then I just went back to my room and I didn't know what happened afterwards, but I remember I could not sleep very well that night.
It's a horrific thing for a child to witness, and you had your little sister to worry about as well. Yeah. Clearly with a safety plan in place, Michelle, you'd anticipated that the kids were going to witness something like this.
He'd been very aggressive and intimidating for some time. He hadn't hit me at that point up until that night, but I was worried that he would, so I put the safety plan in place.
That's intriguing, isn't it? That sense of protection for the kids instinctively, but not so much for yourself.
No, and I was really worried that if they tried to intervene, that he'd kill them or he'd hurt them because they were little. So I felt like it was my job to protect them from him and to manage his behaviour. So I subsequently copped a lot from him, and previous to that had got in the way a lot, especially when he was going after Liam.
Michelle, police became aware of his violence because you called the police on him, and his own colleagues attended.
Yes.
So that was sort of the first time that they realised that one of their own was actually now going to be someone who's a subject of their investigation. So how did Professional Standards Command become involved?
July 2018, there was a big domestic violence incident. I was choked unconscious and lost bodily functions when I was choked unconscious, which apparently is pretty significant. And I thought I was going to die when he did that to me.
Liam, were you around for that?
Yes, and pretty much we still had the safety plan in action at the time. So me and my sister, we went outside and we were on our bikes, so I didn't see any of the incident. But then they went outside, and and then he went to the front gate, and he basically said one dead C word, two dead C word, and was pointing at us.
This is what your stepfather's saying to you two kids.
Yeah, he just angrily storms out onto the pavement, and he hits the fence with his hand, and he cuts his hand. There was blood on the pavement, and the fence was broken.
So after this incident, was that when you called the police?
So he's gone outside, and I was really worried he was going to run the kids down in the car because he was trying to get in the car. So I stopped him from getting in the car, and he then punched the car. Was throwing punches at me, but missing. He was quite heavily drunk. And when he left the property, there was a whole lot of things said, but he sort of made a threat to use his service revolver on himself. I ended up calling police because of that and said, he's coming your way, and he's made a self-harm threat. The person I called was one of his mates, a sergeant, and I said there'd been an incident, but I didn't disclose all the details.
Did they seem surprised to learn about the incidents when they finally did?
They didn't believe there were incidents. So
they didn't believe you?
They sent, I believe, 8 units out looking for him. They got him. He was still very drunk. They took him to Royal Melbourne for assessment. I got called by Royal Melbourne later that night, and they said, there's nothing wrong with him. He's also too drunk to assess. He's very angry. And he's told us that the threats he made were about, they didn't say controlling you, but basically, he was just blowing off steam. There's nothing in it. And they were going to send him home. So I sent a text message, which I still have on my phone, to that sergeant that I'd called and said, I'm really scared of him. He crosses the line when he's angry. And then there was a discussion that ensued. And I spoke to another member at the station too. Both of them verbally admonished me.
What did they say?
That now that I was stupid for putting it in writing, because now they'd have to do L17s, which is referrals to the Family Violence Unit. And I should choose my words more carefully, and I should be more supportive because he's got PTSD and he needs my support right now.
Why would they not want to make a referral to the Family Violence Unit if that's exactly what was going on?
I don't think they wanted to believe it. And to give you some context, family violence offenders will show one face to the outside world, and there's this myth out there that good guys don't do family violence. Good guys are the guys who do family violence, and that's why when the good guy next door gets accused of it, you don't believe that he's done it. He was a good guy. He seemed to really love me. We'd gone to a lot of station functions. They all knew me. They knew him. They're like, oh, they're a loved-up couple. There's nothing going on there. She's just trying to get the house. And anyone who knows anything about the family law system knows that making a family violence allegation does not help you at all.
So when you finally went and laid charges, and ultimately police end up laying 71 charges against him, against John, but it took a really, really long time for that to happen, didn't it?
So if I go back to that July incident, they do the L17s. I speak to the Family Violence Unit, but I've been told to not disclose. And I was very careful with my words, and I didn't disclose very much to the Family Violence Unit. There was a guy there who told me later that he grew up with family violence, and he basically called BS on me and said, I know there's something more going on. You need to speak up. But I guess I was pretty vulnerable, and with the kind of threats that had been made about and the manipulation from the other officers, I didn't say as much as I could have. But they knew there had been a pretty bad incident. We went to court the following week because they served a family violence safety notice on him, the Family Violence Unit, and his colleagues weren't happy about that at all. And when you go to court, you see a family violence worker, and you're supposed to see them by yourself, and they ask you what's happened, and it's usually the first female you've interacted with, and that's a really important part of the family violence system. So his colleague decides to come into that meeting with me in uniform, and I'm sure he had good intents and probably just wanted to have a more comprehensive report he was giving to his inspector. But I felt like my will was really overborne because the same guy had told me to choose my words carefully and to be more supportive. So I didn't feel I could disclose, and I've got this guy in a uniform sitting next to me.
Very tricky having police dealing with one of their own. Did they respect your privacy? As I understand it, there were a number of major breaches of your privacy as part of this.
So things kept escalating. It got to the point where I knew I had to get out. I decided that I wanted to go interstate. I had a really good boss at work and said, can I get a transfer? And he said, yes, we can arrange a transfer. You've got to be safe. You've got to look after your kids. We'll support you. I was looking at the logistics of relocating interstate, and I felt I could make a statement from there.
And that's when that plan to get out and escape was leaked back to his colleagues.
Yes. So I had told the family violence detective how his boss didn't take family violence seriously, and she said to me, well, I take it seriously. And so I told her that I had concerns about this officer. So when I told her about my sort of developing considerations about leaving and making a statement from interstate, she called and emailed that officer, the one who makes jokes, and told him that I was planning on leaving. And as you know, the most dangerous period for any family violence victim is when her ex or partner thinks she's going to leave and then actually does leave. And I'd been strangled at that stage, unconscious. He'd hit me. There'd been quite bad assaults. So I'm at extremely high risk. And if, as someone who survived a strangulation, you are 800 times more likely to be killed in a domestic homicide than anyone else. But that's the information she disclosed, my escape plan.
You're livid with rage right now telling me and recalling this story.
Yeah. It's just such a betrayal of trust. It's a breach of the law. They think the law doesn't apply to them.
How did this matter end up being resolved legally? I know that after waiting a year to actually lay these charges, and I think they were laid with 1 day to go before the whole thing would actually expire, then the 71 charges were somehow negotiated down to 6. He ended up pleading guilty to those.
They rolled up a lot of the charges negotiated with him, so he got done for the most serious assaults. They consolidated all of the many breaches of the intervention order into one persistent breach of intervention order breach. They had been going to drop some what they considered to be more minor and trivial charges. So one was for hitting my daughter in the head, and one was for threatening to hunt down Liam in a text message. And I didn't want those dropped. I was happier for one of the assaults against me to get dropped because I wanted strategically to make sure that he was on the hook for what he did to the kids.
What was your living circumstance at this stage? You're not still living with him at this point?
No.
No, okay.
No.
So you managed to keep those charges in?
Yes, so I explained that I wanted that in because I wanted him held accountable for what he'd done to them. But I also wanted, in the future, if they end up with big psychological issues, they can make a VOCAT application for assistance because they're victims of crime and they're proven victims of crime.
And what happened after he pleaded guilty?
He was still a member. They didn't suspend him. He was still on full pay. And I got told a few weeks later that they'd decided to suspend him with full pay. Then sort of the next month it was suspended without pay. And then I was told last month that he'd finally resigned in advance of a disciplinary hearing. So he hasn't really been held to account by VicPol.
You wrote to Police Minister Lisa Neville about all this, about how you believe the charges had been, or the matters had been badly handled by police. There'd been serious breaches of your privacy and that the police simply didn't manage this matter, because they were dealing with one of their own. Did you get an adequate response from her? She
wrote to me and said that Victoria Police acknowledged that getting my matter before the court had taken way too long. And I'd explained in my letter to her that the way the Professional Standards Command system works, if the member keeps breaching the intervention order or keeps assaulting you, keeps engaging in criminal offences, it just gets added to the tab for the investigating officer. And they're consequence-free breaches. They don't get held to account. So you are in a dangerous situation. The person doesn't get charged. They don't get remanded. It just adds another 60 days onto the investigation timeframe. So I said to her, because of that and the privacy breach, I stopped reporting breaches. And there's a lot of breaches and a lot of incidents I just haven't reported because I could see that it was going to end up in charges expiring and all that would be left would be these intervention order charges and a couple of assaults.
It's a catch-22.
It's a game. So I had to make...
You can make the complaints, but it actually ends up giving the perpetrator or the alleged perpetrator more time.
Yes, and also to sort of wear down the clock on some of those summary offences. So I explained that to her, and in her letter, she said they'd acknowledged it had taken too long and that police would follow me up in respect of the breaches I hadn't reported, and they never have.
Never have?
Never have. And I've also been told in a letter from her that, the Chief Commissioner's office was going to contact me, and they never have.
Your ex, John, is out on bail, I understand, while he seeks an appeal to all of this?
So he was sentenced to 3 months jail. Because he pled guilty, he got a sentence discount. Because they also took into account that he's done a whole lot of other things to reduce his sentence.
Did he spend any time in detention, inside?
No, because he immediately appealed and was given appeal bail. So he's currently on appeal bail.
And how do you feel about your safety right now?
I feel pretty unsafe.
And I've got a little boy sitting here looking at me who sighed and nodded his head when I asked that question about safety. How do you feel about your safety, Liam?
Well, it's not as bad as when I knew he had access to a revolver, but now knowing that he's out there and he's probably intoxicated, it just keeps replaying in my mind things that he's done and thinking, could he come here and do something worse?
Liam, I've read through the victim impact statements that you and your little sister made, and they are just heartbreaking reading. And to know also that, in a sense, this doesn't really help, but you're not alone. There are so many other little kids who are dealing with this as well. But one moment really struck me, which was a game that your little sister wanted to play, which was sort of a version of hide and seek, where her great terror was that family services would come and take you guys away and take you away from your mum. And she played a game of hide and seek that involved you playing what role? What role did you play in that game, Liam?
Well, I was the Child Protection Services, and
you were trying to
I was trying
take
to
her away.
take her away, and
she'd hide.
Yeah, and she would hide. It looking back on it now, maybe wasn't the best game.
No, well, this is interesting. I know that someone at a party saw you guys playing this game, and I know people listening today will go, "Oh my God, what kind of a game is that?" But that's your play version of your lived experience.
Yeah, and
Do you think it was a way of you kind of processing it in some way?
I think it is, because when young kids experience DV or family violence, it's not like an adult experiencing family violence, because with an adult it's much easier to process it. But for kids, especially for younger kids, it's very hard to understand all of what was happening.
And we know that children process things, they learn through games and through playing games, and I think that's just such a powerful example of that. I'm talking here with Michelle and Liam, and if this conversation is raising any issues for you, do remember to use Lifeline 13 11 14, 1-800-RESPECT, or you can call the Kids Helpline on 1-800-55 1800. Michelle, there's a number of risks that you're taking with speaking out today, and we need to repeat that this is something that both you and Liam are willing to do. You've wanted to come here today and to tell tricky stories and to answer difficult questions, so let me just repeat that this is very much in your hands. But by doing it today, you're potentially also putting yourself at a disadvantage. Can you tell us how?
Victoria Police, when I complained about the privacy breach, dismissed the complaint without any investigation. So I challenged it twice, and eventually they have conceded that, yes, they did breach my privacy, and I was offered compensation and a non-disclosure agreement. When I complained to them, I didn't ask for compensation. I asked for them to change the system for police wives. And I've written to Dean McWhirter about this. I've done a lot of advocacy, and they're not going to change it. And another family will go through this. So that's why I'm speaking up. But in coming here today, it's costing me a 5-figure sum, because I know I won't get compensation now, but that's fine, because at the end of the day, you've got to live by your values.
Well, compensation doesn't necessarily depend on non-disclosure. Some people might want that, but that's not what compensation is for. So let's see.
That's not what drives me. I don't want another family to go through the years of hell that we have at the hands of Victoria Police.
Michelle, what are you aware of in relation to other police families?
I know people who are with members who are engaging in family violence. It's from the rumour mill, but I know of others who have made complaints and then not gone through with them. I'm aware of someone who apparently had their charges expire. I know that most women in my circumstances don't push it all the way through the way I have. The Magistrates Court and the County Court made a submission to the Royal Commission on Family Violence, saying that the longer the process takes to resolve, the more likely women are to withdraw. And that's what happens. I know I'm rare, and Victoria Police has told me I'm rare.
Michelle, how's life for you now?
We still live with hypervigilance. I know, because I've been told by the services, that you're not safe until a year after the legal proceedings have resolved. So we're not going to be safe probably until the end of next year. We are a lot safer now than we were. I regret having made a complaint to Victoria Police, but I don't regret leaving.
Liam, do you get to play slightly different games now?
Yeah, it's not really about Child Protection Services anymore.
Is your life a little happier?
Yeah, when he was in the house, we basically, it was like walking on eggshells. And for me, he hated me. He absolutely despised me. And I would just always retreat to my room and be scared to come out. And he would tromp down the hallway, calling me a C word. And most kids my age shouldn't even know that word.
That's right.
But now I'm having to try and break those habits, because I would always just retreat to my room, try and escape by reading. But now my life is getting better, but I still live with some of those scars almost. Just little things can just trigger me.
I've said to the kids that surviving domestic violence is like being a forest in a bushfire. So you get the wave that comes through and decimates you, and that's the family violence, and then there's a second wave, which will be the police, and a third wave that's the court system. And then when they're gone, you don't go back to normal straight away, do you? You're destroyed, you're fragile, and seasons have to pass before those green shoots start coming back. And you will get some things flower that you've never seen before. There's some stuff that will never come back, but life will come back. Life will come back in time, and we will thrive, but it will take some time, and we have to give ourselves that time.
I'm glad in that burnt out but hopefully regrowing forest that you have this remarkable little boy, Liam. And Liam, I'm so glad you have this incredible mum as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take great care, and thank you for your bravery.
Thank you.
Michelle and Liam, who spoke to me earlier. Joining you after the 9 o'clock news will be Dean McWhirter, who's the Assistant Commissioner of Family Violence Command with Victoria Police, to answer some pretty important questions about just where the process went wrong, about why very private and potentially dangerous details about Michelle's escape plan were revealed within the police force, and why it took so long for Michelle and Liam to get some justice. Thank you so much for so many wonderful comments that you've made about Michelle and Liam's bravery there on text messages, and a lot of calls coming in as well, which I'll be very happy to take. Dean McWhirter will join you. But to answer one particular question, it was very much the desire of Michelle and Liam to tell their own story. It's highly unusual to hear from a child who is a victim of family violence. You may not have heard that before. Understand that he was not subject to that. That was a very strong choice that he wanted to make. Sarah's called in from Melbourne. Sarah, good morning.
Good morning, Virginia. I'm a family violence worker, and I work with victim survivors, and I consistently hear of police berating, undermining and failing to act in response to survivors who are trying to do the right thing and trying to get help. In particular, failing to act on breaches of IVOs, which enables perpetrators to continue the abuse. In my experience, there appears to be a serious cultural problem whereby police perpetrate abusive behaviour themselves, such as minimising and blaming. This is incredibly difficult for me as a worker in instances. In one case at the moment that I have, a woman has been trying to get the police to help her for nearly a year now.
And that's the really tricky part, Sarah. I'm going to be putting all of that to Dean McWhirter, who's Assistant Commissioner of Family Violence Command with Victoria Police. Thank you for raising it again. And these are the questions I'll have to ask. And joining you in just a moment will be Dean McWhirter, who's the Assistant Commissioner of the Family Violence Command with Victoria Police, to answer some really serious questions raised there by, well, I hope you found it a very important, I certainly found it a deeply moving interview and talk with Michelle and Liam, not their real names, but who voluntarily very much wanted to come into the public domain and tell their story of not only surviving family violence at the hands of a serving Victorian police officer, but their experience of, frankly, police command really failing them, the system failing them, and failing clearly to see this issue as one that needed to be as independently and fairly dealt with as they might deal with any complaint of family violence. So many text messages coming in. Oh my goodness, what a indictment on Victoria Police, says Caroline in East Bentley. It's awful that victims should be bullied, traumatised and endangered by those who are paid to protect and serve. And this as well from Lizzie in Highton. Thank you for the wonderful interview with Liam and Michelle. May they all flourish now in safety and in peace. Lots of your calls rolling in as well. We'll speak to Dean McWhirter in just a moment. But let's hear from you after hearing at length from Michelle and Liam. And Jessica has called in from Melbourne. Hi, Jessica.
Hey, how you going?
Good, thanks.
I was just calling in because I found that story extremely brave. I've actually been a survivor of family violence, and have a very positive and healthy life now, and was probably a couple of years ago was actually dating a Victoria police officer, and he'd actually told me about his day at work where there had been a domestic violence case where a woman had been constantly texting and calling her partner, and he had come home and assaulted her, and he'd pretty much made a remark to me that she kind of deserved it, and that there was a stigma in the police force that they didn't take a lot of the domestic violence cases quite seriously, and that it was often kind of the woman's fault, which we know it never is the woman's fault, and that if you call the police, you should be able to have your voice heard. So I found that extremely interesting, and obviously stopped dating that person after they had disclosed that to me. But I can see why so many people have issues with family violence and calling the police.
That's a really interesting little insight into the culture there, isn't it, Jessica? Thank you for that. Marcus in Pakenham, good morning to you.
Good morning, Virginia. What a disgrace on the police and also on Lisa Neville. If that lady had written to Lisa Neville, I'm so surprised that she wouldn't have at least realised it's very important and at least followed up on the lady. I mean, what was that lady going through? And her boy, what's he seen all his life? How is he going to feel about somebody else coming into their lives at some stage? I mean, what really disappoints me is the fact, this woman was offered a non-disclosure agreement.
Yeah.
I mean, that's disgraceful.
Oh, that struck me as well. To represent both sides of the story, Lisa Neville did reply, of course, to Michelle and did acknowledge the failings along the way. But the failings
shouldn't be there.
Well, yes, I accept that. I mean, it'd be interesting when you hear from Dean McWhirter, and he'll join you in a moment, because he acknowledges and makes the point, and he can make it himself, that he believes that police officers, he holds them more accountable than other members of the community. They're the words of Family Violence Command Assistant Commissioner Dean McWhirter himself, more accountable. So you're right, in the police force's own terms, that should not have happened in the first place. It did, but then it's how it was dealt with afterwards that also forms a really important part of the story. Tony has called in from South Melbourne. Tony, good morning.
Good morning, Virginia.
Hi.
Hi, can you hear me clearly? Sorry.
Can indeed. Go right ahead.
Oh, good. Look, just it's been touched on about the NDAs, and I'll send you a story on Broad Agenda, Canberra University website, about sexual violence today. But I was doing some research, and as you may recall, NDAs were a key tactic used by Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, and indeed Donald Trump. Ronan Farrow's book on Weinstein reveals that.
Catch and kill.
Catch and kill. And it reveals a pattern of behaviour by the powerful and authorities to silence victims and essentially blaming victims and threaten them. And so I guess one of the questions for the Victorian police is, how common is this practice? Because it's a really, really abusive mechanism. We also know that NDAs were used in the many cases of child abuse by the Victorian Catholic Church.
I think the NDA issue is a very important one in particular, and whether they're even appropriate in the Victoria Police setting, I think, is an important question to ask. Other texts coming in this morning. One of the most important stories ever presented on ABC Radio Melbourne, in my opinion, says Nick. Surely someone has to be fired at Vic Pol. And police should not police, says another. That's an eternal challenge, isn't it, for the police dealing with breaches by their own. They have Internal Standards Command, they have Police Standards Command to look at those issues, but by definition, really, any organisation being asked to examine itself is problematic. Hi, Virginia, I just turned on your conversation regarding the horrible story of the policeman's violence. It was just updated, I'm sorry, and I can't finish that because there's just too many texts coming in. I'm sorry it's updated at that time. Police and privacy, no such thing. Try living in a smaller country town with this sort of thing. It's an interesting point to make. Many calls coming in. Dean McWhirter will be joining us in just a moment. We'll be getting him on the line in a moment. Pamela has called in from Caulfield, and I think she's got a slight criticism of our program this morning. Pamela, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Go ahead.
Yes, I do. I just and I'm not condoning family violence. I just think it's appalling, and I found it quite distressing. Basically, it was a 25-minute interview, which I felt was too long, and I just wonder why it had to be that long, and we needed to know so much detail. There is a Royal Commission going on with family violence, and I think sometimes we can do too much. We need to be putting money into this. We know it's happening, but keeping it to the fore, I don't think is helping. Police are in a lot of trouble at the moment for different things, and I'm not condoning any of their behaviour either, but I just think we might be exacerbating some of the behaviour towards police that are not involved in this type of issues.
That's a fair observation, Pamela. Thanks for listening and for calling in. It was our call that an incredibly complicated story that, let me tell you, we truncated and cut down enormously to get to 25 minutes because there are so much detail in this story. We felt it was important enough that you hear in detail because we believe that these voices need to be heard, and we also thought, given that Liam very much wanted to do it, that it was incredibly important to hear the lived experience of a child who has survived family violence too, because that's the reality for so many Australian children. Dean McWhirter joins you now, Assistant Commissioner of Family Violence Command with Victoria Police. Assistant Commissioner, I'm really glad you could join us. Good morning.
Good morning, Virginia. No problems at all.
Dean, Michelle, who spoke to us earlier, is out in Melbourne somewhere this morning listening to you right now. What do you want to say to her?
Well, good morning, Michelle. And, in terms of our previous conversation and communication, I'm very moved and touched by your tragic circumstances of what you endured in terms of your circumstance with your perpetrator and your children. It's an important story to be told, and I'm committed to making sure that story is told within Victoria Police, and that we make the change that we have on the process of change from the Royal Commission that we continue to make. And part of Michelle's story is that we need to change, make sure we have consistent practice in our approach to family violence response, make sure we have consistent practice in relation to how we respond internally to where members of or employees of Victoria Police are perpetrators of family violence. So my commitment to Michelle is that I hear your story. I'm absolutely touched by your story. It's really important that stories such as Michelle's are actually told, because people in the community need to understand that the trauma, the impact, the terrifying circumstances that family violence has and on victims of family violence. It's a really, really important story to be told, and I'm committed to making sure that we respond appropriately.
Dee, that's very nice of you to say, but let me just read to you what Michelle emailed to us this morning. And this is what she wrote to us this morning of something that happened 2 days ago. She said, the consequence-free breaches are still going on. We had one yesterday with police passing a message on to me from my ex via the police email system, which both breaches the intervention order, which is still in place, and also isn't something they'd be doing if he were not an ex-colleague cop. And she finishes by saying they still can't take the blue out of it. Dean, that took place 2 days ago. So you've still got a really big problem in your force, don't you?
Well, look, I don't know anything about those circumstances, but certainly...
Let's accept that at face value. Look, you
yeah,
can even not believe it if you like, but if we do, are you surprised to hear that?
I'm absolutely surprised to hear that, considering Michelle's circumstances, the trauma that she's been involved with in terms of her circumstances, the police involvement with her circumstances and the outcome. Absolutely surprised that that's occurred, shouldn't have occurred, and totally inappropriate.
So your force are still doing this to, or some members are still doing this to this woman, to Michelle?
Well, I don't know what's been done, in fairness, but in terms of what has been provided to her from her ex-partner, if there's some communication, it shouldn't have occurred. Without knowing the full circumstances of the intervention order and the conditions, it would seem to me on face value that it's a breach of an intervention order, and if that's the case, then appropriate action should be taken in relation to that contravention of that intervention order.
So what should happen? What should be the consequence for the person who breached that intervention order, which, by the way, is put in place by police and courts, and who is a police officer? What should happen to that person, Dean?
So, first of all, would need to see exactly the communication and what took place. Then a normal complaint process would occur within Victoria Police through Professional Standards Command, and that would be assessed on the content of the actual complaint and the circumstances, and then a discipline process would occur in relation to anybody that may have transgressed in relation to the breach of that intervention order.
You accept, don't you, that the time just before a woman plans to leave a perpetrator is the most dangerous time for them, yes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
All right, so if that's the case, what was the consequence for the serving police officer who shared details of Michelle's planned escape?
So I'm not aware of that at all, Virginia, so I can't help you there, unfortunately. I'm not aware of the actual investigation that took place in relation to any complaint that occurred in relation to Michelle's circumstances. So I'm not able to provide you with any information in relation to that.
But that's part of the details that she has relayed back to Victoria Police on more than one occasion.
That may well be the case. I don't know.
But this and two other privacy breaches were referred by IBAC to Police Standards Command. They were dismissed in May 29 without substantial investigation, and after challenging the finding twice, Victoria Police finally admitted to the breach in September 2019.
That's correct, as I understand it. So yes, an acknowledgement of the unlawful disclosure in relation to Michelle's concerns was recognised, acknowledged, and Victoria Police apologised.
Well, that's the breach we're talking about, Dean McWhirter. So what should be the consequence for the person who was involved in breaching her privacy and sharing those plans?
So, again, I'm not aware of what has taken place in relation to any discipline investigation in relation to that investigation or the outcome of that particular investigation.
So is that a way of saying that that person was not disciplined?
No, not at all. I'm just saying I don't know the circumstances of any internal investigation in relation to that particular allegation.
Well, I don't know why. I don't know why. Why not? Because, as I mentioned, Victoria Police did finally admit to the breach in September of last year. They admitted to that breach. So,
well, the circumstances are that an internal investigation is not my remit. That sits with Professional Standards Command. I'm not aware of the investigation that surrounds that. I'm not aware of any outcome in relation to that particular issue of the breach of her. If there was a breach of privacy.
Well, there was a breach of privacy because it was found to be so by Victoria Police. I must say, Assistant Commissioner, I'm surprised that you've come on air this morning not knowing an answer to that question, but putting that to one side, yep. Just as a Assistant Commissioner and knowing this story and knowing that it was found to have been a breach, what do you think should happen to such a police officer? What should be the consequence for them when you've acknowledged that the time of leaving is the most dangerous time for a woman who's been the subject of family violence?
Yeah, well, every circumstance needs to be investigated and fully understood in terms of the context of what's occurred. So I would have expected that an investigation would have occurred in relation to a complaint in relation to the breach of privacy, and members would have been interviewed in relation to that and asked questions in relation to their actions or inaction, as the case may be.
You say, if anything, we hold our officers more accountable than other members of the community. I guess in order to persuade us of that today, given the discussion we're having right now about whether there's been consequences for a privacy breach or not, you're going to have to demonstrate that in some way as a police force, aren't you, Dean McWhirter?
Yeah, well, look, I totally agree, Virginia. You're spot on. So what we have to understand in terms of context here is the transformation and transition that Victoria Police have done essentially since the circumstances of Michelle's sad circumstance in terms of her perpetrator being charged. The reality is, since then, we've totally revamped our whole education process within Victoria Police. So over 15,000 police members have now been educated in relation to family violence, and that will be ongoing. We've actually now restructured our secondary response, which is the Family Violence Investigation Unit. So at that particular point in time, the Family Violence Investigation Unit structure wasn't fully developed and implemented into Victoria Police. So now we have over 200 detectives, investigators, within family violence units across this state investigating family violence at high and medium risk matters, of which this would have been. On top of that, we've done a whole revamp of our family violence report. So we've had to actually rechange and restructure our whole family violence report in terms of risk assessment and looking at the impacts of high risk, medium risk, and also all the high risk indicators that provide members with guidance in relation to how they should be responding to matters of family violence.
Except, of course, as I say, and we started our interview with this, just 2 days ago, you still got serving active members of the force who are prepared to breach an intervention order and to make a woman who's been the victim of brutal family violence at the hands of a police officer feel unsafe all over again. I guess what I keep trying to pull you back to, Dean McWhirter, is that the words that you say are terrific, they're informed, they're reassuring, but I don't think they seem to square with the actions yet.
Well, I think, look, I'll be honest with you, in terms of where we've moved from an organisation, from the Royal Commission to where we are now, we are continuing to work on our consistency of practice and approach. And the reality is, if members transgress in relation to circumstances such as these, then proper process needs to be applied, an investigation has to occur, the members need to be challenged in terms of what they did or didn't do, and then an outcome needs to be provided to those who are affected. And that needs to be actually conveyed not only to the person who's been affected, but also to the Victoria Police community as well.
The number of Victoria Police officers charged with family violence offences has actually increased from 18 in 2018 to 23 in 2019. How many convictions have there been?
That's a really great question. I actually don't have that information in front of me because
you don't have that one either.
No, I don't have the actual number of convictions. I know roughly about the number of charges associated with all of those offences. So it totals in terms of 2019 something in the vicinity of 140 odd charges.
Did they go to court?
So once those matters, once people are charged, those 23 members, as far as I understand it, would have gone to court.
But we don't know how many convictions.
No, and then so convictions are. Obviously a matter for court, it's not a matter for police, it's a determination by the court as to what sentence or outcome occurs in the court process.
The comment that keeps coming up again and again on text message this morning, and I have to say, Dean McWhirter, it keeps occurring to me, is whether we can realistically expect a rather closed and self-protective nature of a police force, how the community can ever really have faith that you're truly capable of investigating your own independently and adequately. Is it time for us to reconsider that these complaints actually need to be managed in a different way altogether?
I don't think so. I think the reality is, in terms of the policy and practice that sits around the investigation of circumstances and complaints, is quite clear. It's very apparent to members about their need to actually comply with those policies and procedures. And in relation to family violence in particular, there is a wealth of process that sits around conflict of interest in terms of independent supervisors attending family violence matters involving police employees, in terms of notification right through up to our Director of Legal Services in relation to family violence matters, also in terms of welfare, and in terms of independent investigation of those matters. So I'm comfortable in relation to the policy and practice. The issue for us always is about consistency of practice and people adhering to that practice. And that's why we're quite comfortable about having IBAC. That's why we're quite comfortable about having an internal professional standards command investigative process, because we have to continue to learn. We have to continue to understand that people will make mistakes, sometimes intentionally and sometimes inadvertently, and we have to learn from those mistakes. And I think Michelle's circumstances are, absolutely tragic. I've had conversations with Michelle. Her circumstances are tragic. What that demonstrates to me and to all your listeners is the sheer trauma that perpetrators of family violence have on their victims.
But also compounded when the police force itself clearly don't take it as seriously as they should, and when they seem to act out of self-interest. That's the compounded problem here this morning, Dean McWhirter. It's not even so much about family violence itself, which, as you say, yes, we are becoming increasingly better aware of. It's the compounding all of that violence and that problem by her believing that she wasn't being taken seriously by the police. Just finally this morning, looking at all of that, do you think you still have a culture problem?
I think we have an improved knowledge and understanding of family violence. I think we have a much, much better response than we did when I first started in this role.
As it concerns your own members, family violence perpetrated by your own members, can you really say to us this morning you have an improved understanding of how to deal with that?
There is no doubt that we are reflective of the community, and we have, as the Royal Commission quite rightly found, we have perpetrators and victims in Victoria Police. Our job is to make sure that our response is appropriate, it's actually timely, and it's actually respectful of victims and their concerns, and that we make sure we do everything possible to support them in terms of the trauma that they've experienced.
I really appreciate you coming on this morning, Assistant Commissioner. Thank you.
No worries, thank you.
Assistant Commissioner Dean McWhirter from the Family Violence Command there with Victoria Police. I can't keep up with your text this morning. They're just flying through. Reference to policy and practice are simply hollow words. They have a long way to go. And hi, Virginia, please insist that Dean has homework, i.e. he come back with all the answers that he didn't have for you, says Chris. And tragic circumstances, asks Emma from Frankston. Tragic failure of police is the real problem. And I think that's actually a really good observation. I've got so many calls and I'm absolutely desperate to get to them. But Tina's called in from Geelong about the story we're covering comprehensively this morning, and that is whether Victoria Police can really be expected to fairly investigate their own when their own serving members perpetrate family violence. Tina in Geelong, hello.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, go ahead.
I have been working in the industry for about 25 years. And
which industry is this, Tina?
It's family violence.
Okay.
And we have a lot of police officers that are perpetrators of family violence, as well as prison guards, as well as security guards. All these officers carry guns. They're the women that they're in relationships with, or the women that have left them, are at extremely high risk. We have to be very careful in how we set their safety up. So as because police know the rules, they know the policies, they know the procedures of their own police force, so they know how they can break the law without breaking the law. One particular police officer supervisor actually rang one of the agencies I worked for and said that he was investigating his officer, and to leave everything up to the police force to investigate, and yet this particular police officer is still perpetrating crime against his ex-partner.
Still now?
Still now, yes.
And still serving?
Still serving, yes.
Tina, I'm going to take this one offline just because I want to be careful, but also I want to speak to you further about this off air, and let's see what we can investigate there. But that's completely shocking to hear. Diana, is it Diana or Deanna in Seaford?
Diana.
Diana, good morning. Good to hear from you. Go ahead.
I was married to a policeman 50 years ago, and I was a young mum, newborn baby sort of thing, and he was getting very stressed. So I contacted the police commissioner at the time and said, look, he needed help. And I got a nice phone call next day to say, don't worry, love, he'll be all right. Now, he wasn't really all right. He did leave the police force, but they don't seem to want to, or didn't want to do it then, and I'm not sure they seem to want to do it now. I provide help to their members or follow up on these things. They just don't seem to want to.
Or help you. How did you get through, Diana? Were you okay?
Yes, well, he left the police force and we moved, and our marriage did break up, and he is now deceased. But right. I think it added to a lot of his problems, the stress of the work, and it just, everything was just, well, it's okay, but it wasn't okay. And it still doesn't seem as though they're facing up to the fact these people are in trouble.
It certainly doesn't sound like it, does it? A bit of closing of the ranks there. Diana, good to hear from you. Happy to talk about Victorian state politics and also our big issue this morning, which is how police officers deal with their own when they stand accused of family violence. Joe in Derrimut, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning, Virginia.
Go ahead.
I was a serving member of the Victoria Police for 8 years. Mm-hmm. I left the job a very long time ago. And when I resigned, on the back page of my resignation, there was a little box that said, would you like to talk to someone from Force Command about your resignation? And I ticked the box and I signed it and I handed it over. And that was nearly 27 years ago, and I haven't heard a word from anyone. the sad part is that the job is deleterious to your mental health. It's an awful toll. The Victoria Police burn through coppers like nobody's business. There's an endless supply of people who seem to want to join the police force, and it's like they just don't care about the mental health of their members. This perpetrator, who damn nearly killed his wife and has traumatised his son for probably the rest of his life.
Stepson, yes, yeah.
Clearly has had long-standing mental health issues which have gone largely unaddressed by the Victoria Police, and it's not good enough for Force Command to say, this is just a bad apple. The job messes with you in such a significant way that oftentimes you don't even understand how messed up you are. I resigned. It cost me my marriage. I was a pretty unhappy bloke for a very long time, and they did nothing. They did nothing to help. There was never a phone call. There was never any offer of help. There was nothing, and they just don't seem to care about what sort of an impact the job has on you. They don't ask you how you're going. They don't seem to really care at all about your well-being as long as you turn up to work and don't create too many problems for them.
We're told a lot of that has changed now, Joe, that the force is much better at recognising that and dealing with it.
They've also told you that they're much better at dealing with domestic violence.
Yes, indeed.
How's that going?
Yeah, fair point.
I'm struggling to remain calm.
Yeah, I hear that.
It's a massive arse-covering exercise. There are coppers walking around right now with guns on their hips that are messed up people that really oughtn't be carrying a firearm. There needs to be some sort of ongoing psychological evaluation of operational policemen. There needs to be more care taken of serving members of the police force. And then situations wouldn't arise where this guy developed a substance abuse problem and went home and beat his wife near to death.
Joe, how are you going these days?
Well, I was fine until this morning. No, look.
I apologise for my part in that. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, look, it's a thing that never goes away.
Yeah.
It's like a little nagging voice in the back of your head, and I'm sure people who know my voice will be on the phone in a minute to make sure I'm okay. But look,
I hope that, Joe, I hope they are, and make sure you look after yourself as well. Thank you for calling in. I think I'm going to pop you on hold so Katrina can have a quick word with you as well. Just to repeat that number, 1-800-RESPECT. If any of the issues we're talking about this morning raise concerns for you, you can make contact and get some help there day and night. That's a number you should have pinned up on the fridge. Ted has called in from Bentley. Ted, good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning.
Hi.
Hi. Look, it's Ted from Bentley here.
Yes.
I was in the police force for just on 20 years, and I am a PTSD sufferer. I'm going to disclose something that I would never, ever, ever, ever disclose because of various reasons to protect the police force, the Victoria Police Force. I want to back up everything that Joe's saying. But I was working covertly undercover for a number of years, and I suffered very badly from that, all of the things that Joe has outlined, and I'm just praying that they do address it because it is a real issue and they pay lip service to it. And I think the reason being is that they don't have the mechanisms or the programs or the support in place, and until they get a chief in the chair that actually recognises that. I'm so sorry that Kenny Lay left, because I think he would have addressed this. That's all I wanted to say and back up Joe 110%.
Ted, it's really insightful to hear these recollections of serving police officers feeling that command just didn't get the issue and did not deal with it. I'll say it again, we're told constantly that they get it now, but it's the lived experience of people like you that I guess give the lie to that. Tracy's called in from Officer. Good morning to you.
Yeah, hi Michelle, how are you?
It's Virginia here.
Oh, Virginia, sorry.
That's all right, Tracy. You're probably thinking of Michelle, who I interviewed earlier, but go ahead.
Yes, I am. Yeah, she's in my head.
That's okay.
I'm a domestic violence worker,
Mm-hmm.
and I would just like to say that the police do nothing, 99% do nothing but perpetrate more violence on victims.
Oh,
It is appalling.
that's a big sweeping statement that I can't allow you to say and can't let it go to air untested or uncontested. So, Tracy, do you want to just take a breath and have a think about what you're trying to say this morning? I mean, because
The response from police largely is negative. Women are constantly call me, my clients crying because they've been humiliated at the police station. They've been told things like, you think very carefully before getting the father of your children in trouble. You do this, you do that. It's an appalling situation. They do nothing but excuse their behaviour. What that Dean Werther said before was, I hear that speech constantly from police. They're like politicians. They have a line they roll out and they're just not doing the job.
Do you get an opportunity, Tracy, to ever speak to anyone in command or senior police officers and ask them why this attitude prevails?
Yeah, I've had 2 meetings this year with heads of family violence units.
And how do they go?
They just refuse to take zero responsibility. I can give them cases that they know are existing and examples of current clients that they're dealing with as well. I've literally been told that if you get an IVO from court, what's stated on that IVO is not necessarily set in concrete. The police will decide what's a breach and what's not. And it's gut-wrenching to see the effect it has on victims.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm an ex-victim, so I really empathise. I was married to a police officer who was abusive. It's not a great... The Victoria Police Force is... I don't want to be derogatory because there are some good members there, but my experience on the whole is that they do not respond to domestic violence.
Well, that's a real condemnation from both ends of the experience as someone representing survivors, but also as a survivor yourself. So that's pretty depressing to hear, isn't it? Kay has called in from Preston. Hi, Kay.
Yes, good morning. This raises a few questions. Years ago, I worked as a court reporter at the Attorney General's, and we worked across all courts. After 6 months of that, I just could not fathom what humans do to other humans.
Yeah.
Whether it's what you're talking about today, but also things white-collar crime, various instances, people returning from war. What humans do to other humans, they're so devious and conniving and innovative. It never ceased to surprise me, and that's why I actually respect the police, because you're dealing with humans.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
It was never ending as to the amount of the different types of crime.
Did you lose your faith in humanity a bit, Kay?
I do. I don't respect or trust a lot of people because I was brought up to do the right thing. Do it once. My father had a lot of integrity, and you never took advantage of people. You helped people out. But these are very innovative and competitive. Even on the road today, it's what people do to one another.
I know. It just, my goodness, a little bit of human kindness would make an enormous difference, wouldn't it? That's a sobering thought there, Kay. Thank you. I just want to share some numbers with you if any of our conversations today have caused you some concern or anxiety, or you feel you need some support. Call 1-800-RESPECT, the national helpline, 1-800-737-732. There's the Women's Crisis Line as well, 1-800-811-811. The men's referral service is a really useful one too. For blokes out there, 1300 766 497, and of course Lifeline, always there. It's a 24-hour crisis line. That's 13 11 14, 13 11 14 there for Lifeline. If you are joining us at this late stage, well, welcome aboard, but you may have missed a really important conversation this morning with Michelle and Liam, not their real names, who are survivors of family violence at the hands of a serving Victorian police officer. The violence itself was bad enough, but the lack of accountability that followed Michelle's complaints is in a sense the real story. Is Victoria Police capable of investigating itself fearlessly, independently, when it's one of their own that stands accused of family violence? And I'm afraid the answer to that, at least in Michelle's case, is not so much. That interview and also Matilda Marozzi's story on that is up online this morning as well. I've got Michelle in my mind as well. We all have this morning. Matilda Marozzi broke this story and found this story, and she brought the interview to us, and she's written a compelling piece which is online this morning on the ABC Melbourne's page, so you can go there, abc.net.au/Melbourne, and you'll also find a link to the interview where you can hear that in full as well. There's a statement that I've received from IBAC, which I'll read to you as well. But if you want to contact me and share any story arising from this or indeed any other issue that you would like us to investigate further, email me directly, trioli.virginia@abc.net.au, and I'll happily take a look at it. And this has come to us from IBAC, an official statement that we can attribute to them. The information aired on the program this morning is very concerning. Family violence cannot be tolerated. As Victoria's independent police oversight agency, IBAC is now seeking a full explanation from Victoria Police as to how this matter has been handled. And I have to say, I'm really happy to hear that, because there was a role with IBAC originally with this story, and the matter was actually referred by IBAC, serious privacy breaches that put both Michelle and Liam at significant physical risk from their perpetrator. Those privacy breaches were referred by IBAC to Police Standards Command. They were dismissed in May 2019 with any substantial investigation. And then Michelle challenged that finding twice. And then finally, Victoria Police admitted to the breach in September of last year. Unfortunately, when I was speaking to Dean McWhirter this morning, the Assistant Commissioner of Family Violence Command with Victoria Police, he had no understanding or knowledge of that. He said he was not aware of that matter and couldn't speak to me about it, which was disappointing. But IBAC saying this morning that they're now seeking a full explanation from Victoria Police as to how this matter has been handled. I really hope that gives Michelle and Liam, who are, still not feeling terribly safe out in the community this morning, a degree of comfort. We'll stay across this story for you. Great to have your company this morning. Thank you for all of your many calls and texts after our, I think, very important discussion and interview with Michelle and Liam this morning. My thanks to Matilda Marozzi, who secured that story and whose story is up online on ABC Radio Melbourne right now for you to read and hear. IBAC now seeking a full explanation from Victoria Police. We'll stay on that tomorrow. See you tomorrow. Go well.